Hey everybody, we are teaching Tilt Brush. And this is Teaching Tilt Brush on Shameless Mayhem. We're both live at twitch.com/shamelessmayhem and archived on youtube.com/shamelessmayhem. And heck with it, we even have shamelessmayhem.com for all your shameless needs. But today we are teaching Tilt Brush, and particularly today is all about doing large textures and area of effects using Tilt Brush tools. So things like scales on a fish or a dragon, or fur on an animal, or maybe I want to do a forest landscape and have lots of trees coming up. I could paint every single tree one by one, or we could look at the few different techniques to do larger areas, either by doing many different pieces, or by implying it using color and shadow. Well, we're going to start using our little Android friend here just because Google gave it to us and he's convenient, not to mention public domain, but we're going to dress him up a little bit using some of these different techniques. Now, all of these techniques are available for all versions of Tilt Brush. Some of the larger scale, though, so if I was going to do a large landscape with a huge forest, that many trees can start to push the Oculus Quest a little bit as far as that dreaded low memory warning. So it's definitely good to do as textures on objects, textures in situations, but the larger scale you get, you are going to run into the memory issue. There are ways around that. For example, taking a finished piece and exporting it as a model does save some information if they're not actual individual brushes anymore, but the whole thing is one piece. That's one way to start getting more and more out of the resources you have. But for now, we're just going to add some simple textures to our different models, to our different environments. One of the tools we'll be using a lot today is the selection tool. Now here's another case where PC users, if we hold the button down, we've got a few different flavors of selection tool. Invert, select all, flip selection. Those are not available on all versions as of September 2019. What's nice is Google keeps updating Tilt Brush, so in future updates it may be adding more functionality to all the different headsets that are out there. So for this guy, I'm going to start off just by giving him a little bit of a fishy scale coating or a lizard scale coating. Rather than just a smooth texture, I want to apply, there's a surface here. Now some of this stuff I'm going to do in a nice black color just so it stands out. A lot of this we can work with the color of the shape. So if I've got this green Android Andy here, instead of doing a flat black, I'm going to go into a nice darker green. You can see it's darker than his actual color. He's got an actual bit more of a yellowy green. There we go. So now it's going to blend in with the model. Instead of looking like it's been painted on the surface, it's going to start working with it. Now another trick I'm going to do for this case, some of these brushes are 3D, like our flat brush or the wire brush, meaning when I use it, it's going to cast shadow. It's also going to have highlight and shadow of its own. So a thick brush, you can see as I curve it, light and shadow on the brush itself. I don't want that here. So I'm actually going to undo these guys, and I'm going to switch to a flat brush, and this not flat, but in this case marker, which you'll notice when I paint with it, it has no dimension. Even though I'm painting in spirals, there's no highlight or shadow on the paint. Likewise, if I paint up against a surface, it doesn't cast a shadow. So when I use these middle row first tools, the marker tools, I can paint right over the surface without it feeling like a separate piece. It now looks much more like I painted green on the surface of Andy. So when I go in with these scales, I'm going to use this type of flat brush, and I'm also going to make him big and my brush tiny. So that now I can go in and start doing this texture, and it's up against him. I've got him as a model. I'm even going to go so far as to pin him in place. Let's see if I can get my quick menu here. Whoops, wrong quick menu. Here's my pin him in place so that he ain't going anywhere. You can now see he's got the big red pin in him, so we know he ain't going to go anywhere. switching to the marker. So I'm just going to do a couple quick loops. And again, be aware of where your surface is so you don't go too far inside. I'm now going to use my selection tool and grab these pieces, all these pieces, scales. And I'm going to see if I can fit them. I can also at this point make them bigger or smaller depending on the texture I want to go for here. But now that I've got the look I want, if I deselect, we can see that green against the Android. It's very faint. It's just a suggestion because I don't want it to look like the subject. I still want it to be the Android. I just want it to look like a dragon or something like that. So now that I've got this scale pattern, you can notice I didn't just do full loops, but each one sort of connects to the one before it. Ideally, if I repeat this on all four sides, they should roughly connect. So I'm going to switch to my selection. I'm going to grab these pieces. Since I pinned the model, I don't have to worry about accidentally moving the model. But now I can duplicate another set of scales and get it roughly lining up. We're not going for perfection here because, again, it's going to be a small part of the background. People won't be as focused on it. But now I'm going to get a couple of these guys placed in. And again, be aware where the surface of the Android is so I don't go inside, but I still remain visible. That one got a little bit inside. So let's select this guy and pull him back out. Turn off the selection. Now we're starting to get that pattern. And at a smaller size, it starts to read as the surface. I'm going to, in this case, darken that green a little bit just so it stands out a little bit more. So I'm going to switch to a darker green. And the recolor tool, since I've got him pinned, I'm not going to worry about him. I'm just going to go in and darken these guys up a little bit. This recolor tool, not only can I use it to recolor the whole thing, but I could use it to apply more shadow, that type of thing. So let me undo this. Whoops, a little too far. And now I'm just going to darken in the ones where you can see the Android gets shadowed. If we look closely, these scales aren't actually paler than these scales. It's the same color green. But since the Android goes into shadow, and my green isn't affected by shadow, it looks like I've got a brighter green over here and a darker green over here. So I'm actually going to go in using the recolor with the darker green, but I'm just going to do over here. So the paler green stays the one in highlight, and the darker green starts taking over where the shadows are. Again, I'm just trying to imply there's texture here. We don't have to go into too much detail. But if you really want to spend a lot of time, you could do very detailed scales, actually make the pattern change for the musculature, that type of thing. For this lesson, I'm just doing a quick example. Now that I've got this in place, I'm going to grab some more of these dark scales and use the duplicator. And again, just try to get them to line up more or less with where the surface of the Android is. So now we're starting to get a little bit of that texture, a little bit of that happening. As I get a larger surface, I can actually go ahead and select larger and larger pieces. Now when I duplicate, I've got a whole strip. And make sure we line up nicely. And with our duplicator, now we're starting to have a larger area getting that texture. Now we're starting to see how that feels. It's getting a little messy up here. Another nice thing about having done this with all separate little scales originally, the eraser will get it one scale at a time. So I can go in and just start trimming away areas that are getting a little too cluttered, and I can be as selective as I want. I can zoom in really close so I can just get the particular ones I want to get. Clean up get those details as perfect as you can. So when we do scale it back, now we can start to see how the feeling overall looks. I'm going to go ahead and select all this stuff. Here's a case where the PC user, all I've got here is the model pinned in place and the scales. So if I do a select all, I get all the scales, but the model stays pinned. So now I'm going to duplicate and start getting more of this scale pattern happening over the whole surface. Now it's starting to come together. Now we're starting to see this effect. And again, I can go in for a little cleanup. Wherever it's starting to get a little messy, or if it pulls away from your model a little too much, now we've got a way of showing off this detail. Simple little lines tend to not take up too much memory, but the more you get, the more elaborate you get. That's what's going to start to take its toll on the smaller systems. So this is an example of doing simple line and the selection tool for really duplicating that pattern, expanding that pattern. If you took the more time, you could actually start using the lighters and darks to imply musculature, to apply a little more texture and shape to it. So I'm actually going to switch to a paler green, a little more yellowy, and recolor to get some of the ones up here a little brighter, since it's up near the top. Here's another case where I can make it bigger, make him smaller, so I can recolor larger areas at once. So I still have that green texture, but it's now got much more highlight and shadow. So let's highlight these a little more. But now I recolor with the darker shade and start bringing in definition for shadow and highlighting. Now we'll go back to our lighter shade, just so we can start implying more detail. The more time you spend, the more detail you spend, the more accurate, the more descriptive you can make these lines. This is doing it all line by line. There are some tools to speed up some process depending on the surface you're looking for. I'm going to rotate him around to this side. This time we're going to go for a little furrier, a little more spikier. And again, I don't want to have to draw every single line of fur coming out it. Here's the case where our coarse bristles. There's a brush that gives you many lines at once. So I'm going to make this a lot bigger and grab our slightly darker green. Now if I just paint, we've got those lines. But these lines, you'll notice there's a direction to them. There's sweeps to them. If I just do a single short click, we get a single little tuft. It is a three-dimensional brush. It does cast a shadow. But if I just start brushing coming out of the surface, but very short, so we just get these single strokes, little clusters. And I can vary it up, coming at it from different directions, again, making whatever patterns are appropriate for the surface you're trying to make. Just like before, once I start getting some good texture going, anywhere I want to, because they're all separate lines, I can use the eraser to trim it back. I can use the selection tool to grab a section of it and duplicate. And now I can expand this fur texture. Since these are all single brush strokes, they don't take up too much memory for our dreaded low memory warning. But now I've got them, you can see I'm rotating them, changing different sizes. Once you've got them duplicating, you can even make them bigger and smaller. So it'll be larger, shaggier over here in the body. But now I'm going to grab all this fur, duplicate, and his toupee will be a much finer fur, a little thicker. And again, by changing the direction, changing the angle, I'm still following these patches, following the skull. But now I've got this wonderful, soft, furry android texture, or grassy if this was a hillside. These are ways of getting that type of feeling without having to model every single line, without having to worry about all that type of detail. And again, as before, a simple recolor tool can help give us highlighting, give us patchworks in the fur. Maybe he's a patchwork green and browns. We'll get some brown patches on him, a few brown patches in his hair, that type of thing. Once that texture is in place, whether you're going for lizard skin or grassy furry, we've got a bunch of tools to really help bring out that texture, model it in 3D. Don't be afraid to use color to add your own highlight and shadow, especially in the case where the paintbrush itself doesn't have highlight and shadow. By giving it color, we can give the impression. Especially if this is an object in the background, part of the landscape, people aren't focusing on its details so much as going for the overall general impression. So these are different ways to add a texture, a surface, to objects. And part of today's lesson is exactly that. What ways can we cover a surface with detail without having to go too crazy with individual detail? Not only using simple brush strokes, but our selection tool can really duplicate that and really make it a large mass without you having to do every single piece by hand, like our toupee was done in patches. So now that I've got this, we're going to make it a little more landscape. I'm going to have my lovely statue on a pedestal here, but I'm going to add some rolling countryside, and we'll add forest, that type of thing, using some of the other tools. So now that I've got this, I'm going to use my matte tool, matte hull, to get some general ground landscape. I'm going to use a fairly gray-green so that it doesn't overwhelm, and we're just going to draw some shapes over here, some shapes over here, just so we can get some sort of rolling hills types of textures. Okay. There we go. Pedestal in a landscape. And what I'd like to do is add over here forest texture, trees, maybe leafy trees, maybe pine trees. Whereas around here, around the base, I'd like to add what looks like a crowd of people. Again, it's a mass texture. I'm not going to be looking up and trying to look the person in the face so much as I want to give the impression of a crowd before this statue of our half fur, half scale android. So we're going to start with our forest over on this side. Let's move the landscape over here. And I'm going to start with just a couple of trees. So I'm going to make the landscape itself pretty big so I can focus on a couple of trees right here. Now there's a bunch of different shapes I could use. Part of it depends how detailed I want to be, how abstract I want to be. Since I'm going to use the selection tool to make some duplicates, I could make a couple very detailed trees. So for example, using a brown wire to make a trunk, whoops, a little thick there, to make a trunk with a couple branches coming off type of thing, and then nice green splatter brush. Lovely leaves. And then I duplicate that tree. Select all of its pieces, duplicate. Put one over here, duplicate. Put one over here, duplicate. Put one over here. And again, with these duplicates, I could change size, change angle of rotation, go in and recolor so they aren't all the exact same tree. The more you do, the more filled it's going to be. The more memory it takes, but ideally, if the trees themselves are fairly simple, I can get several of them going here. And now, select all of them and their branches. So when I duplicate, I'm getting a whole grove. And now I'll rotate these, duplicate, move, and maybe rescale these, Duplicate. We'll put some of the smaller ones over here as well. Duplicate. Size also helps perspective. So as I move into the background, more of these tinier trees helps imply that these hills are farther away than they look. And then as they come forward, they get bigger and bigger, covering up more and more of the view as they approach the camera. So if we pull back, we've got more of a forest going on here. You can see it just has a narrow strip right now. So again, with our magic selection tool, now that I'm giant, I'm going to get all these trees. I'm going to get all their branches. When you're doing a large area like this, you can actually see in your view screen what has been selected and what has not been selected. So I can make sure I don't miss any branches, any tree trunks. I get all these pieces. Since I'm being a little sloppy, you'll notice I also picked up some of the landscape. Deselect. I'm going to deselect the big landscape pieces. So all I've left selected at the moment are the trees. Exit deselect mode. Duplicate. Trees. Duplicate. Trees. Duplicate. Trees. Deselect. Stop that. So now we've got an area completely covered with forest. If you look closely at it, yes, you can see that they're all the same tree, especially since I didn't rotate too many of them. I only gave it 2 branches. But you can see how it starts making a large area fairly quickly without too much effort. The more variation trees you start with, the more natural and varied that forest is going to look. Make sure you do change rotation and size so you don't have just neat rows of trees. Unless you're making an orchard, then neat rows of trees works pretty well. I'm actually going to wipe out most of these guys using the simple eraser tool and add this time, whoops, I got a little too much. That's okay, I can put those back. But we're going to look at how we can use a couple other tools to make other types of forests, like pine trees and things, even more easily. What's difficult with our deciduous trees like this is even simple trees are made up of a lot of pieces. Each tree had a trunk, couple branches, and several green blobs as the treetops. Let me put my landscape back in. Dropper, landscape. Give me a fresh landscape here. But now I'm going to go in over here on our tool brush, the tapered spikes tool in a nice sage green. The size of your brush is the size of the base of the tree. Click and drag makes a simple triangle. It is just a 3-sided plus bottom triangle. If you have straight edge active, they'll all be perfectly straight and pointy. You can still pull them up at different angles, but they'll all be perfectly pointy. If you don't have the straight edge going, then you can waver them. Now we're getting to a little more Dr. Seuss forest type of thing. But with these types of tools, what I can now do is grab a section of forest here, a little too big. I'm now going to add some pine trees in the middle here. Let's get a brighter green. Now we're going to select the pointy trees. And start getting lots of those mixed into our forest. Getting a little tall there. Fortunately, again, I can adjust and move things around if they're a little too tall, make them a little skinnier, that type of thing. So now, especially at a distance, especially in scale, this is turning into a much denser mixed forest. And I can go giant and use my selection tool to take this whole pattern. As much as I feel like taking the time to gather, let's get a bunch of the spiky guys in here too. Make sure I'm not missing too many tree trunks. But I need to deselect big guy. Okay. Duplicate. 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 So now I've got this massive forest texture. I only drew a few of them. This whole forest only took me a few minutes. But this is what we're getting into when we're using the selection tool to try to make a large area, a surface effect, an area of effect, or some kind of texture to really make things fit into either a large scale or a finely detailed surface. Most of these are using selection tools. We are now at the point where I might start pushing a quest. If I have this forest covering a large area, that's a lot of detail. Here's also a case where I could take a clump of forest, export that as a model. And we'll be using blocks and poly and models in another class, but then I can actually have a forest object. Because it's not individual pieces, the quest can handle it much more efficiently. So taking piece, saving it as an object, building a larger piece using those objects are ways to get a little bit more of this type of effect. Even if you're not connected to a powerful computer, you can still do these wonderful landscape and detailed texture images. Area effect using tilt brush tools. So the last piece I was going to make here is we were going to have a worshipful crowd at the feet of the android. And as before, it's pretty much the same idea. I'm going to do like they do in the movies and just get a few people in a crowd. And then use the system to copy and paste and recolor and make it a teeming mob. So I'm actually going to get things a little big here. So I can get a little bit of detail. I'm going to just use one of the flat tools so that there is a little shadow, a little bit of highlight. We're going to use nice medium colors. I don't want to get too vibrant because then it starts blending and blurring and not looking like a crowd, but looking like bright paint. So I'm going to use small pieces, and we're going to make a little guy waving. Hi! He's in his red shirt. And then we'll give him blue jean pants. Sort of purple jean pants. This guy is going to have dark hair. That's not very dark, is it? There we go. So there's little guy number one. I'm actually going to do a couple of different people in different poses in different directions. And then this person's going to be wearing a blue dress. And we will give this person long red hair. Now I have another person over here with a bright green shirt, just a t-shirt though. And he's going to be flexing because he's really powerful. He's wearing shorts. He'll be wearing purple shorts. No, this is not the Hulk. He's just having fun pretending. So let's give him dark hair. Just from 3 people. I could do more, get more detail, more potion. The more variation you get, the more convincing it's going to be that it's a big crowd. Also, the easier it'll be to hide all the repetition. But just for this example, we're going to grab just our guys here. Make sure I get all their pants and clothings and things. Duplicate. Change their direction. Change their angle. Change their size. Not too much because they're all supposed to be people. So even with these guys, I'm going to get a couple of different directions, a couple of different angles, a couple of different sizes. Now I'm also going to go in and start doing some color variation. So let's grab a nice orange and the recolor. I'm going to get small so I can get in and start saying, okay, this person's dress here. We're going to change that shirt over here. We're going to change these person's pants. And in fact, they'll be wearing a jumper. We're going to switch to a pale yellow, and we'll have this person's hair be yellow, and this person's shirt be a brighter yellow, and this person's shirt also be yellow, and then this person's pants be yellow. And then we'll go for dark red, and we'll have this person's shirt be a dark red, and this person's hair be a dark red, and then this person's something else. And again, as always, the more variation we work into it, the more varied this crowd becomes. Just with that variation, back to our selection tool, grabbing the crowd. In this case, it's okay if I pick up the landscape because it's all one big piece, so I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody's body parts. And then remove the landscape. Duplicate. More crowd. Duplicate. More crowd. Duplicate. More crowd. Let's make sure that's up where you guys can see this. Duplicate. More crowd. Duplicate. More crowd. Duplicate. More crowd. Just so you know, at this point, I've got a big crowd of people. I've got a forest. I've got lots of texture. I run this on a fairly powerful computer. It's now starting to slow down. Actually, right now we're on our staging machine. This one's only running a 970 video card, so it's beginning to get a little sweaty here. But you can see the more I start expanding, the more variation I have, this crowd becomes a real happening. So now let's go for our selection tool. Grab this crowd. In fact, we're going to make it small so that I can easily grab the whole darn thing nice and quick. Everything in the green bubble gets selected. And there's a lot of people here. But I want even more. So we're getting even more in here. All these people. Now again, here's where a quest may start to whimper a little bit. Even my 970 is whimpering at this point. Now I'm going to remove the big landscape and that landscape. Let's see if we can duplicate. Crowd. Duplicate. Crowd. Duplicate. My entire system is hesitating each time I tell it to duplicate because now it's getting to be a lot of information. But now I've also got a very large crowd of people, oops, cut off by the landscape there, gathered in front of the statue. Now that we're getting into that many people, now even though there's only a few body types, it really reads as a large crowd. There's a lot happening. As you twist and move things around, it creates even more variation, little groups of people, that type of thing. So we're looking at making area of effects and textures. Whether you're going for a natural setting, the surface of an object. As you can see, we've got our android with his furry side and his scaly side. Or if you're trying to do environmental pieces with large groups, large areas of intricate detail. The system can handle it, and you are not stuck doing every single piece one by one. Selection tool can be a great tool to get a pattern and distribute that pattern over a large area. When you do, make sure to use the recolor and resizing and rotating so it doesn't just be obviously the same patch over and over and over. That type of tiling, that type of duplicating does become obvious over a large area. So by rotating and resizing, the viewer doesn't see the tile, doesn't see that patch. So now you couldn't tell that there were only 3 or 4 people to start with. It's now a convincing crowd. So this is all done just in a few minutes. See how much you can do if you've actually got lots of time to play with. I've got our wonderful landscape here with our forest landscape, a whole big party going on in front of our idol up there. So let's just go ahead and close things out. Thanks for joining us this week. Remember, we're always there on YouTube/Shameless Mayhem, and we do this live regularly on Twitch.com/Shameless Mayhem. So definitely tell your friends, anyone who's interested in this type of art or is interested in VR, that type of thing. We've got a lot of fun tools and games going on here all the time. So share with your friends, come and visit us as often as you like. We ain't going anywhere, and have fun with Tilt Brush.